I don't know why I didn't just walk into the kitchen that night. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe the sound of her voice pulled me to a stop. I was coming downstairs for a late-night glass of water when I heard my wife, Emily, talking on the phone. Her tone was hushed, but not enough to hide the words that changed everything. He shouldn't know he's not their real father until the kids graduate from college. He'll take care of us until then. For a moment I thought I misheard her. My brain scrambled, trying to make sense of what she just said. Not their real father. What the hell was she talking about? I leaned against the wall, suddenly unable to move. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I heard Emily laugh softly, as though she was sharing some harmless secret with whoever was on the other end of the call. The sound of her voice, so casual and carefree, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Yeah, she continued. He's completely clueless. I mean, he's great with the kids, but, well, it's not like I ever planned for it to go this way. He's just safe, reliable. He'll never question it. By the time they're grown, it won't matter anymore. The glass in my hand slipped from my grip and shattered against the tile floor. My wife went silent. My brain caught up to the sound, but I still couldn't process what was happening. I was standing there, staring at the shards on the floor, when she poked her head out of the kitchen. "Matt, are you okay?" Her voice was laced with concern, but her eyes held something else, fear. She was holding her phone at her side, and I could still hear the faint sound of someone's voice on the other end of the call. "I'm fine," I said, my voice sounding far too calm for what was boiling inside me. I didn't meet her gaze. I just crouched down and started picking up the pieces of broken glass. Dropped my glass. That's all. "Oh," she hesitated, and I could feel her watching me. "Well, be careful. I'll grab the broom." I nodded but didn't look at her. My mind was racing. My hands were shaking as I swept up the glass, her voice echoing over and over in my head. He's not their real father. He'll take care of us. What the hell did that even mean? Who was she talking to? And who the hell was I in this equation? I forced myself to finish cleaning up, though every fiber of my being wanted to confront her right then and there. But something held me back. I needed to think. I needed to understand what I'd just heard. If I went off now, I wouldn't get the answers I needed. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me. My mind kept replaying the last 10 years of my life like a broken movie reel. All the times I held my kids in my arms, kissed their scraped knees, read them bedtime stories. All the sacrifices I made to give them a good life. And now I was questioning everything. Were they even mine? The next morning, I got up early and left for work without waking her. But instead of going to the office, I drove to a quiet park and sat in my car for hours, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't just let this go. I had to know the truth. Sitting in that car, staring at the empty park, I couldn't stop my mind from running through the memories of the life we'd built together. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Emily and I had been together for over a decade. I thought we were solid. Sure, we'd had our ups and downs, like any couple, but nothing that ever made me doubt her. I thought back to the night we met. She was working at the coffee shop near campus, and I was a broke grad student barely keeping it together. She had this energy about her, a confidence that drew me in. Within a year, we were married. A year after that, we had our first child, Emma. 2 years later, Josh came along. I thought we were happy. I thought I was doing everything right. I worked hard, sometimes too hard, but it was all for them, for her, for the kids. But now I was questioning every single moment. Were there signs I missed? Red flags I ignored? One memory stood out. About 4 years ago, Emily's friend Vanessa let something slip during a dinner party. She'd had a little too much wine and joked about how Emily always had a knack for keeping her options open. At the time, Emily laughed it off, saying Vanessa was just being ridiculous. I didn't think much of it then, but now it felt like a warning I'd completely ignored. Then there was the time Josh was about 3, and a stranger at the park said he didn't look much like me. I brushed it off, thinking he just took after Emily more. After all, kids can be a mix of either parent, right? But now, Sitting in my car, those words hit me like a truck. I needed to know the truth. Not just for me, but for the kids. If what I heard was true, if I wasn't their father, then what? What would that mean for them? For me? I drove to the pharmacy and bought 2 DNA test kits. My hands were shaking as I paid for them, the cashier making casual small talk I couldn't even process. When I got home, I hid the kits in my office. I wasn't sure how I was going to pull this off, but I knew I had to. That night, I couldn't look Emily in the eye. She noticed. "You okay?" she asked, setting down her wine glass after the kids were asleep. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound normal. "Just tired. Work's been crazy." She gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't overwork yourself. You've been doing so much for us lately." The words stung in a way I couldn't describe. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed proof before I confronted her. The next day, I took samples from the kids while Emily was out running errands. A strand of Emma's hair from her hairbrush, a toothbrush Josh had left on the counter. I packed the samples into the kits and mailed them off, feeling like a thief in my own home. The waiting was unbearable. Every time Emily spoke to me, every time she smiled or laughed, it felt fake. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How she was always on her phone, smiling at texts she didn't share with me. How she'd been going out with her friends more often lately, staying out later than usual. Had she always been like this, or was I just seeing it now because of what I knew? 2 weeks later, the results came in. I opened the envelope in my office, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the paper. The results confirmed what I already knew in my gut. Neither Emma nor Josh was biologically mine. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the results. The world felt like it was collapsing around me. Everything I'd worked for, everything I thought I had, was a lie. But the thing that hurt the most? I still loved those kids. They were mine in every way that mattered, except the one that Emily had decided was worth lying about. I had to make a decision. I could confront her, demand answers, or I could walk away and leave it all behind. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. I spent the next few days in a haze. The DNA results sat buried in a drawer in my office, but they might as well have been branded onto my skin. Every time I saw Emma's big, toothy grin or Josh's little quirks, how he always tapped his fork 3 times before eating, I felt a pang of guilt. It wasn't their fault. They didn't ask for any of this. But I couldn't shake the feeling that everything about my life was a sham. Emily was oblivious. Or maybe she wasn't. Maybe she'd noticed how distant I'd become and was choosing to ignore it. She'd occasionally ask, "You okay, babe?" But when I brushed it off with excuses about work, she didn't press. What did press me, though, was the constant churn in my head. Who were their fathers? How long had she been lying to me? And who else knew? I decided I couldn't just sit around with my questions. I needed answers. I started with her phone. One night after she'd fallen asleep, I slipped out of bed and grabbed it off the nightstand. My heart was racing, and my hands felt clammy. I knew the passcode. She hadn't changed it in years, but when I unlocked it, my stomach dropped. She'd set up a biometric lock on most of her apps. Messages, photos, social media, all of it required her fingerprint or face to open. I stared at the screen, the dim glow casting shadows across the room, and felt the first flicker of real rage since this started. What was she hiding? I didn't get my answers that night, but I wasn't giving up. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to her routine. I noticed she was protective of her phone, keeping it on her at all times, even when she went to the bathroom. She wasn't always like that. One afternoon, when she was in the shower, I saw my chance. She'd left her phone charging on the kitchen counter, and I had about 5 minutes tops to do what I needed. I didn't bother with her apps this time. Instead, I checked her call log and her recent contacts. One name popped out immediately, Ryan. I stared at the name for a moment, trying to place it. Ryan. Then it hit me. Ryan was one of her old co-workers from years ago. He used to come over for barbecues with the other guys from her office. I remembered how he always lingered a little too close to Emily, how he laughed at all her jokes. I never liked him, but Emily always brushed it off. "Oh, stop being paranoid," she'd say. "Ryan's harmless." Harmless, my ass. I didn't have enough time to dig deeper, so I jotted down his number and put her phone back exactly where it was. My hands were shaking again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was pure anger. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. After the kids were in bed, I grabbed a drink and sat down in the living room. Emily walked in, saw me staring into my glass, and gave me a curious look. "Long day?" she asked, sitting down across from me. "Something like that," I said, swirling the liquid around. I could feel her eyes on me, but I didn't look up. "Hey, random question. You still talk to Ryan?" Her expression froze for a fraction of a second before she laughed. "Ryan? No, not really." "Why?" "Just curious," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I thought I saw his name pop up on your phone the other day." Her laugh was tighter this time. "Oh, that? Yeah, he called me a while ago about some work thing. Nothing big." I leaned back and took another sip of my drink. "Funny. I didn't think you two kept in touch." She shifted uncomfortably, picking at the hem of her shirt. "We don't really. I mean, I haven't seen him in years." I nodded slowly, letting the silence hang in the air. She was lying. I could see it written all over her face, but I didn't push. Not yet. The next day I called Ryan. He didn't answer at first, but I kept trying until he finally picked up. "Hello?" he said, sounding annoyed. "Ryan, it's Matt," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Emily's husband." There was a pause. "Oh, hey Matt. What's up?" "You tell me," I said, cutting straight to the point. "YV, you been calling my wife?" His silence told me everything I needed to know. When he finally spoke, his voice was shaky. "Look, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me," I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "I know something's been going on. I just want the truth." He stammered for a moment before hanging up on me. I stared at my phone, my chest heaving. The fact that he couldn't even come up with a believable excuse told me exactly what I needed to know. But this wasn't enough. I needed concrete proof before I made my move. Later that week, I hired a private investigator. It felt dramatic, like something out of a bad soap opera, but I didn't care. I needed someone who could get answers without tipping Emily off. The PI's name was James, and he wasted no time. Within days, he had pulled Emily's phone records, tracked her locations, and found the smoking gun. She wasn't just in contact with Ryan. There was someone else, too. Another man named Paul. Paul wasn't a random fling. According to James, Paul lived 2 hours away, and Emily had visited him multiple times over the years. I didn't know who Paul was yet, but I was about to find out. By the time I stepped into my lawyer's office, I felt like a shell of myself. The weight of everything. The DNA results, Emily's lies, the names Ryan and Paul constantly swirling in my head, had drained every ounce of energy I had. I wasn't even sure what I wanted anymore. Revenge? Justice? Closure? Maybe all of it. My lawyer, Linda, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. After I laid everything out on the table, Emily's phone call, the DNA results, and the private investigator's findings, she leaned back in her chair and let out a low whistle. "Well, Matt, I'll be honest with you. This is going to get ugly." Her words hung in the air like a warning. "I don't care," I said. "I want her out of my house. I want to cut off every dime I've been giving her. And I want to sue her for paternity fraud." Linda raised an eyebrow. "You've got a strong case for paternity fraud, especially with the DNA results and her admissions to others. But you need to understand that this isn't just about money. If you sue her, it's going to drag everything out into the open. The kids will find out. Are you ready for that?" The mention of the kids hit me like a sucker punch. Emma and Josh. God, I didn't even know how to think about them anymore. They weren't biologically mine, but they were still my kids in every way that mattered. How would they look at me if I left? If I stopped being their dad? "I don't want them to suffer," I said quietly, staring at the stack of papers on her desk. "This isn't their fault. No, it's not, Linda agreed. But your wife made this mess, not you. If you go through with this, you're setting boundaries. You're protecting yourself. And honestly, she deserves it. I nodded, my jaw tightening. Then let's do it. The first step was starting the eviction process. Emily had been living in the house for years without contributing a cent. It was legally mine. I'd paid for it, maintained it, and made sure the mortgage was always on time. Linda assured me that, given the circumstances, I had every right to ask her to leave. It was surreal. The home we'd built together, the place where we'd raised Emma and Josh, was about to become another battlefield. The next step was preparing the paternity fraud lawsuit. Linda explained that suing for paternity fraud wasn't common, but it wasn't unheard of either. You've got two strong pieces of evidence, she said. The DNA tests and her admission on the phone. That's more than most people bring to the table. She warned me, though, that Emily's defense would likely get nasty. She might try to claim you always knew the kids weren't yours and accepted them anyway. She could paint you as an absentee husband. Be prepared for her to throw mud. I don't care, I said, though part of me did. I hated the idea of my reputation being dragged through the dirt, but I hated being played for a fool even more. As we started the legal process, Emily still had no idea what was coming. She must have sensed something was off, though. I'd been keeping my distance, avoiding long conversations, and sleeping in the guest room under the pretense of a bad back. She tried to ask me about it once, but I brushed her off. It's just work, I said. I'm stressed, that's all. She didn't push, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. She was watching me more closely, her eyes narrowing whenever I walked past. One night, while I was sitting in the living room pretending to watch TV, she sat down next to me. Matt, are we okay? She asked, her voice softer than usual. I wanted to laugh at the irony of her question. Were we okay? Did she honestly think things could ever be okay after what she'd done? But instead of snapping, I just nodded. Yeah, Emily, we're fine. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but it wasn't time to confront her yet. Not until everything was in place. A week later, Linda filed the eviction notice. Emily was served at home while I was at work. When I came home that evening, I knew something was wrong the second I walked through the door. Emily was sitting at the dining table, the papers spread out in front of her. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling. What the hell is this? She demanded, holding up the eviction notice. I dropped my bag by the door and met her glare head-on. It's exactly what it looks like. You're evicting me? She shouted, her voice cracking. Matt, you can't be serious. This is my home too. Is it? I asked, my voice cold. Because last time I checked, I'm the one who paid for everything. I'm the one who's been taking care of you and the kids. And now I'm done. Her face crumpled. Matt, what's going on? Why are you doing this? Is this because I've been going out more? I swear, it's nothing. I'm just seeing friends. Don't, I said sharply, cutting her off. Don't lie to me. I know Emily. I know everything. The blood drained from her face. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. For the first time since this started, I felt like I had the upper hand. I've got the DNA results, I said, my voice steady but laced with anger. I know I'm not Emma and Josh's father, and I know about Ryan and Paul. Her eyes widened, and she looked like she might collapse. Matt, please let me explain. No, I snapped. You don't get to explain. You don't get to lie to me anymore. I gave you 10 years of my life, Emily. 10 years. And this is how you repay me. She started crying, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I walked upstairs, grabbed an overnight bag I'd packed earlier, and headed for the door. Where are you going? She sobbed. Anywhere but here, I said. The lawyer will be in touch. And with that, I walked out. I drove aimlessly after leaving the house, unsure of where to go. My world was unraveling faster than I could process. But at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. For weeks, I'd been drowning in secrets, pretending everything was normal, and now it was all out in the open. I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room was depressing, with its stained carpet and flickering fluorescent lights, but I didn't care. It wasn't home, but at least it wasn't there. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the worn-out comforter, wondering how the hell my life had gotten to this point. My phone buzzed. It was Emily. I didn't answer. She called again and again and again. After the fifth call, she switched to texting. Emily, Matt, please come back. We need to talk. Emily. I know I messed up, but the kids need you. Emily, don't do this to them. Her last message hit me hard. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I didn't want to hurt Emma and Josh. They were innocent in all this. But how could I go back to being their dad when I wasn't? I put my phone on silent and threw it onto the bed. I couldn't deal with her right now. The next morning I called my lawyer. She's going to try to guilt-trip you, Linda warned. That's what people like her do. Don't fall for it. Easier said than done, I muttered. She's already using the kids against me. Linda sighed. Matt, I'm going to be blunt with you. Emily's actions are despicable. She lied to you for years, and now she's trying to manipulate you into staying because she doesn't want to face the consequences. You need to stay focused. You've got the eviction process started, and we'll get the paternity fraud suit rolling soon. If she tries to use the kids to get to you, document everything. Texts, emails, voicemails, keep it all. We'll need it if this goes to court. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Got it. That evening, I got a call from my best friend. Eric. Man, what the hell is going on? He asked. Emily called me in tears, saying you left and she doesn't know why. She's freaking out. Of course, she was dragging other people into this. She knows exactly why, I said flatly. What's that supposed to mean? I hesitated. I trusted Eric, but this wasn't something I wanted to broadcast to everyone. Still, I needed someone to talk to. Look, Emily's been lying to me for years. The kids, they're not mine. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Wait, what? What do you mean they're not yours? I mean exactly that, I said, my voice trembling with anger. She cheated on me, Eric, twice, and she hid it from me for over a decade. I found out a few weeks ago, and now everything's falling apart. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Matt, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry, man. Yeah, well, sorry doesn't fix this, I said bitterly. I've got lawyers involved now. She's getting evicted, and I'm suing her for paternity fraud. Good, Eric said firmly. She deserves it. And look, if you need a place to crash, my couch is always open. Thanks, I said, grateful for the offer. I'll let you know. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings and sleepless nights. Emily kept trying to contact me, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations. Emily, you're overreacting. It was a mistake. Emily, are you seriously going to abandon your family over this? Emily, you're not thinking about the kids. They need their dad. The messages didn't stop, but I didn't respond. What could I say? That I was drowning in guilt? That I hated her for what she'd done but hated myself even more for missing Emma and Josh? I couldn't deal with her manipulation anymore. Finally, I decided it was time to confront her properly. No texts, no half-truths. Just the cold, hard reality. I texted her, "Be home tonight. We need to talk." When I walked into the house, she was waiting for me at the dining table. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her hands were trembling as she clutched her coffee mug. "Matt," she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said. "You don't get to start this conversation." "I do." She swallowed hard and nodded. "I gave you 10 years of my life," I said, my voice low and steady. "I loved you. I loved those kids. And all that time you were lying to me. You cheated on me, Emily. Not once, but twice. And instead of coming clean, you decided to let me believe I was their father. You let me build my entire life around a lie." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stop. "Do you have any idea what that's done to me? Do you have any idea what it feels like to look at those kids and wonder who they are? To wonder who I even am without them? I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. And once it started, I didn't know how to stop. That's not good enough, I snapped. You don't get to destroy someone's life and then play the victim. You don't get to use me as your safety net while you screw around behind my back. I love you, she said desperately. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Please, Matt, don't throw everything away. I laughed bitterly. You threw it away, Emily. Not me. I'm done. She broke down sobbing, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I grabbed the rest of my things, walked out the door, and didn't look back. Walking out of that house for the last time felt surreal. It wasn't just a house. It was the place where my kids learned to walk, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases. But every memory felt tainted now, poisoned by the lies I'd uncovered. I threw my bag in the trunk of my car and started driving. I didn't have a destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to get as far away from that place as possible. As I drove, my phone buzzed repeatedly. I didn't need to look to know it was Emily. Her desperate messages had become a constant in the last few days. When I couldn't take the buzzing anymore, I pulled over on the side of a quiet road and shut my phone off completely. The silence was immediate and oddly comforting. I ended up at a small motel just outside the city, the kind of place where no one asks questions and the beds creak every time you move. It wasn't much, but it was a place to crash while I figured out my next steps. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress staring at the ceiling, my thoughts drifted back to Emma and Josh. Even after everything, they were all I could think about. Josh's first word had been Dada. He used to follow me around the house, calling for me like I was his whole world. Emma, on the other hand, was my little adventurer. She was always dragging me outside to explore the woods behind our house or hunt for bugs in the backyard. They weren't mine, not biologically, but they felt like mine. How could I just walk away from them? But how could I stay? The next morning, I called Linda from the motel. I need to ask you something, I said. Go ahead, she replied. If I walk away from the kids, what happens? Legally. She paused. Well, since the DNA results prove you're not their biological father, you're not legally obligated to provide for them. You can stop child support, withdraw financial assistance, whatever you need to do. And if I don't walk away? Her tone softened. Matt, you've been their father in every way that matters. If you want to stay in their lives, you can fight for custody. But it's going to be complicated. The courts tend to favor biological parents. And if Emily fights you on it, it could get messy. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't want to hurt them. I know, Linda said gently. But you need to decide what's best for you, too. You can't keep pouring from an empty cup. Her words stuck with me long after I hung up. Over the next few days, Emily's texts became increasingly frantic. Emily, Matt, please come home. We can figure this out. Emily, the kids keep asking about you. I don't know what to tell them. Emily, you're really going to abandon them? After everything? That last message hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent years building my life around being a husband and a father. Walking away felt like tearing out a part of my soul, but staying felt like betraying myself. A week after leaving, I got a call from James, the private investigator. I found something you might want to know, he said. What is it? I asked, bracing myself. It's about Paul. Turns out he's been paying child support for another family in the next state over. He's got a wife, 2 kids, the whole 9 yards. I blinked. Wait, he's married? Yup, James confirmed. And based on what I've dug up, I'm pretty sure Emily's been seeing him on and off for years. He's the father of one of your kids, right? Emma? My stomach churned. Paul wasn't just some random fling. He had an entire other life. And Emily had been fine with dragging me into this mess without a second thought. What about Ryan? I asked. Ryan's story is less complicated, James said. Looks like he was a short-term thing. A couple of meetups here and there. No kids involved. I clenched my jaw. So Ryan was just a fling. But Paul? He was more than that. He was a backup plan. A safety net just like I'd been. The next day, I met with Linda to discuss my options. I want her out of the house, I said firmly. She's been served the eviction notice, Linda said. We just need to follow the process. If she doesn't leave willingly, we can escalate it. And the paternity fraud case? It's in motion, she said. But be prepared. It's going to be a long fight. Emily's going to pull out every stop to paint herself as the victim. I don't care, I said. She lied to me for years. She used me. She doesn't get to walk away from this without consequences. Linda gave me a small nod. I'll make sure of it. That night, Emily sent me another text. Emily, you think you can just disappear and leave me to deal with this on my own? You're being selfish, Matt. You're destroying this family. I stared at the message, my anger bubbling to the surface. I'm destroying the family? She'd been the one who lied. She'd been the one who cheated. She'd been the one who built this house of cards. And now it was falling apart. I didn't respond. Instead, I poured myself a drink, sat in the quiet of the motel room, and promised myself one thing. I wasn't going back. After weeks of silence on my end, Emily finally snapped. Her messages had gone from pleading to accusatory to downright angry. Now, it seemed like she'd shifted into full-on damage control mode. It started with her showing up unannounced at the motel. I'd just gotten back from a quick run to clear my head when I saw her car parked outside the room. My stomach sank. I hadn't told her where I was staying, but apparently, she'd found out. Probably from Eric. He meant well, but he had no idea how far gone things were. Matt, she said, jumping out of the car as soon as she saw me. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair a mess. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I stopped in my tracks, my body immediately going rigid. What are you doing here? We need to talk, she said, her voice breaking. You can't just disappear like this. The kids are asking about you every day, Matt. They don't understand why you're gone. Her words hit me like a freight train, but I kept my face neutral. I've already said everything I needed to say. No, you haven't, she shouted, stepping closer. You're just running away, hiding in this dump while your family falls apart. Is that what you want? For Emma and Josh to grow up thinking you abandoned them? That's rich, I said, my voice cold. You're the one who lied to me for over a decade. You're the one who cheated and kept it a secret. Don't you dare try to pin this on me. Her lips trembled, and for a second, I thought she was going to cry again. But then her expression hardened. I made a mistake, Matt. I admit it. But I did what I thought was best for the kids. For us. Don't, I said sharply, cutting her off. Don't try to make this about them. You didn't do this for anyone but yourself. She stood there in silence for a long moment, her hands shaking at her sides. Finally, she looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. What's it going to take for you to come home? I blinked, genuinely stunned by the question. Come home? Emily, this isn't something you can fix with an apology. You didn't just break my trust, you destroyed it. You destroyed everything. I'll do anything, she said desperately, stepping closer. We can go to counseling. I'll cut ties with Ryan and Paul. I'll sign a postnuptial agreement if that's what you want. Just come home. Please. Her words felt hollow, like she was just throwing out whatever she thought I wanted to hear. But nothing she said could erase the damage she'd done. I can't, I said quietly. And honestly, I don't even think you want me to. You just don't want to deal with the fallout of your choices. Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked past her, into the motel room, and shut the door. The next few days were eerily quiet. No texts, no calls. For a brief moment, I thought maybe she'd finally backed off. But then the storm hit. It started with mutual friends reaching out. First, it was Eric. Hey man, he said over the phone, his tone cautious. I just talked to Emily. She's saying some pretty wild stuff about you. I sighed, already bracing myself. What's she saying? She told me you abandoned her and the kids, he said hesitantly. That you've been acting paranoid and unstable. She even hinted that you might be cheating on her. I let out a bitter laugh. Cheating? Are you kidding me? Look, I don't believe her, Eric said quickly. I know you, Matt. But she's telling everyone who'll listen. She's trying to get ahead of this. Of course she is, I muttered. She knows she screwed up. So now she's trying to play the victim. Over the next week, more friends reached out with similar stories. Emily was telling anyone who would listen that I was the one who'd broken the family, that I'd left her without explanation, that I was some unhinged husband who'd snapped out of nowhere. It was infuriating, but Linda had warned me this would happen. She's trying to manipulate the narrative, she'd said. It's classic behavior in cases like this. Don't engage. Let her dig her own grave. So I stayed quiet. It wasn't easy. There were so many times I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops, but I knew I had to be patient. One day, I got a call from Emma's school. "Mr. Blake?" the principal said, her tone kind but firm. "I just wanted to check in. Emma's been very upset lately. She's mentioned that you're not living at home anymore, and it seems to be affecting her behavior." My heart sank. What's she been saying? She hasn't gone into much detail, but she's been crying during class and refusing to participate in group activities. It's clear that she misses you. I swallowed hard, guilt twisting in my chest. Thank you for letting me know. I'll figure something out. That night, I sat in my motel room, staring at a photo of Emma and Josh I'd kept in my wallet. They were so young, so innocent. They didn't deserve any of this. But how could I be there for them when being near Emily made my blood boil? I picked up my phone and called Linda. "I need to see the kids," I said, my voice shaking. Linda paused. "You know that'll mean facing Emily, right?" "I don't care," I said. "They're my kids. I can't keep avoiding them." "All right," she said. "I'll draft a visitation agreement. That way, Emily can't use this against you later." 2 days later, I saw Emma and Josh for the first time since leaving. They ran to me as soon as they saw me, throwing their arms around my waist. "Daddy, where have you been?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "I've missed you so much," Josh said, burying his face in my chest. I hugged them tightly, tears streaming down my face. "I've missed you too, buddy. So much." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Seeing Emma and Josh again was a bittersweet relief. They didn't ask too many questions, at least not yet, but the weight of their confusion hung in the air. Emma clung to me like she was afraid I might disappear again, and Josh kept saying how much he missed playing soccer with me in the backyard. It felt good to hold them, to see their faces light up when I made silly jokes or listened to their stories about school. But it also tore me apart. Every time I looked into their eyes, I saw reminders of the lies Emily had built our family on. Still, I was determined to focus on them, not her. For now, my visits were short and supervised. Emily sat in the other room during the first visit, giving us space, but I could feel her hovering. Every now and then, I'd catch her peeking through the door, probably waiting for me to slip up or say something she could use against me. After the kids went to bed that evening, I was packing up to leave when Emily cornered me in the hallway. "You seemed good with them today," she said, her voice soft and careful. "I am good with them," I replied, my tone sharp. "I just mean, maybe this doesn't have to be so complicated," she said, wringing her hands. "You can stay here for them. We can figure out the rest later." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You don't get it, do you? There is no figuring this out. You made sure of that." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Matt, I know you're angry. I know I hurt you. But you love those kids and they love you. Do you really want to tear them away from their dad because of one mistake?" "One mistake," I said, my voice rising. "You lied to me for over a decade, Emily. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Over and over and over again." "They don't know," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously. "And they don't have to. We can keep it that way for their sake." Her words stopped me cold. She wanted me to stay in this lie, to pretend nothing had happened, all for the sake of keeping her secret. "You really think I can just forget everything?" I asked. "That I can pretend none of this happened?" "I'm asking you to think about the kids," she said, her voice breaking. "They don't care about DNA. They care about you." For a second, I almost believed her. But then I remembered what I'd overheard that night. He shouldn't know he's not their real father until the kids graduate from college. She didn't want me to stay for the kids. She wanted me to stay for her. I shook my head and walked out the door without another word. The next day, I met with Linda to discuss how to proceed. She's trying to manipulate you, Linda said firmly. It's classic guilt tripping. Don't let her pull you back in. I know, I said, but it's hard. The kids, they're everything to me. I can't just walk away from them, but I can't live like this either. That's why we're handling this through the courts, Linda reminded me. We'll set up a custody agreement that works for you and protects your rights. Emily doesn't get to dictate the terms anymore. I nodded, but my mind was still spinning. Part of me wanted to believe Emily's words, that staying was the right thing for the kids, but I knew I couldn't trust her. A week later, James, the private investigator, called me with more updates. Hey, Matt. I dug a little deeper into Paul's situation, he said. Yeah, I replied, bracing myself. You're not going to like this, he said. Paul's been paying child support for his other family, but he's also been transferring money to Emily. What? I said, gripping the phone tighter. Looks like she's been getting support payments from him for years, James continued. It's not a huge amount, but it's consistent. She's been hiding it in a separate account under her name. My blood boiled. Not only had she lied about the kids, but she'd also been taking money from Paul behind my back. Money she clearly didn't need, considering I'd been covering everything. Do you think he knows about me? I asked. Hard to say, James replied. But based on what I've found, I doubt it. He seems just as clueless as you were. I clenched my jaw, my anger simmering. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a full-blown scam. Emily had been playing both of us, using me for stability and Paul for extra cash. That evening, I sat in my motel room, staring at the pile of evidence James had sent over. Bank statements, phone records, emails, it was all there, laid out in black and white. For years, I'd worked myself to the bone to give my family a good life. I'd missed weekends, vacations, and milestones because I thought I was doing what was best for them. And all that time, Emily had been taking from me and giving to someone else. It was almost laughable, how blind I'd been, how trusting. I'd always prided myself on being a good judge of character, but Emily had fooled me completely. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice, not just for the lies she'd told, but for the way she'd used me. I picked up the phone and called Linda. I want to escalate this, I said. Take it as far as we can go. You sure? She asked. Once we go down this road, there's no turning back. I'm sure, I said firmly. She doesn't get to walk away from this. Not this time. The day we filed the paternity fraud lawsuit, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. For weeks, I'd been boiling with rage, trapped in the fallout of Emily's lies. Taking legal action didn't make the betrayal hurt any less, but it gave me a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about reclaiming my life. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through Emily's world. As soon as she was served, the calls started flooding in again. Emily, are you serious? You're suing me? What is wrong with you? Emily, you're going to humiliate me in front of everyone. Emily, this is going to destroy the kids. You're being so selfish. I didn't reply to a single one. A week later, we had our first court hearing. Emily arrived with her lawyer, a slick, fast-talking guy in an expensive suit. She looked worn down, her face pale and gaunt, but her expression hardened when she saw me. The courtroom itself was cold and clinical, the kind of place where emotions didn't matter, only facts. And the facts were on my side. Linda wasted no time presenting the DNA results and evidence of Emily's long-term deception. She painted a clear picture. I'd been lied to, manipulated, and used for financial support, all while Emily secretly maintained relationships with other men. Emily's lawyer, predictably, went on the offensive. Mr. Blake knew about the children's parentage all along, he argued. He willingly took on the role of father, and now he's trying to back out of his responsibilities. That's not true, I said firmly when it was my turn to speak. I had no idea. I loved those kids. I thought they were mine. And she let me believe that for over a decade. Emily avoided my gaze, staring down at her hands as I spoke. Her lawyer continued to push, trying to paint me as vindictive and cruel. Isn't it true that you abandoned the family home without explanation? That you've refused to see the children for weeks? I left because I needed time to process the truth, I said. And I've seen the kids since then. I love them and I always will. But this isn't about them. It's about her lies. As the hearing progressed, it became clear that Emily's defense was crumbling. The evidence was too strong, the lies too blatant. Linda even brought up the bank transfers from Paul, which Emily's lawyer tried to dismiss as a personal loan. By the end of the day, the judge ruled in my favor on the financial front. Emily would no longer be entitled to spousal support, and I was allowed to stop providing financial assistance for the kids, pending further hearings about custody. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Outside the courthouse, Emily caught up with me as I was heading to my car. "Matt, wait!" she called, jogging to catch up. I turned to face her, my expression blank. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why are you trying to ruin me?" "Ruin you?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "You've already ruined yourself, Emily. I'm just making sure you don't drag me down with you." She wiped at her eyes, her mascara smudging. "I was scared, okay? I didn't know how to tell you the truth. And I thought maybe it wouldn't matter in the end. You were such a good dad, Matt. I didn't want to lose that." I shook my head. "You didn't just lie to me. You lied to them. You built our entire life on a lie, Emily. And now it's falling apart because of you. Not me." She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I got in my car and drove away. Over the next few weeks, the court proceedings escalated. Emily tried to paint me as an absentee father, claiming I'd abandoned her and the kids without warning. But Linda was relentless, countering every accusation with hard evidence. The judge ultimately sided with me on most issues. Emily was evicted from the house, forced to move into a smaller apartment closer to the city. She retained custody of the kids for now, but I was granted regular visitation rights. More importantly, the paternity fraud case moved forward. Emily would be held accountable for her actions, both legally and financially. The fallout was messy as expected. Word of the lawsuit spread quickly, and soon, everyone in our social circle knew the truth. Some people sided with Emily, buying into her sob story about how I was punishing her for a mistake. Others were horrified by what she'd done, reaching out to me with messages of support. But honestly, I didn't care what anyone else thought. I wasn't doing this for them, I was doing it for me. One night, during one of my visits with the kids, Emma asked me the question I'd been dreading. "Daddy, why don't you live with us anymore?" she asked, her big brown eyes staring up at me. My throat tightened, and I struggled to find the right words. "Sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes," I said carefully. "And those mistakes make it hard to live together. But I'll always be here for you and Josh, no matter what." She nodded slowly, but I could tell she didn't fully understand. How could she? She was only 9. Josh, thankfully, was too young to ask those kinds of questions. He just wanted to play and hang out like we always did, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around us. As I drove back to my motel that night, I felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but at least I was finally moving forward. After the court's rulings started to take effect, the reality of everything set in for both me and Emily. She was forced to leave the house within a month, moving into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. The kids hated the move. Emma cried for days about leaving her room and her friends, and Josh kept asking why we couldn't all just go back home together. Emily, on the other hand, was doing everything she could to play the victim. I heard through mutual friends that she was telling people I'd destroyed her life, and that the lawsuit was vindictive and unnecessary. But I didn't care about the whispers anymore. The people who mattered, my close friends and family, knew the truth. That was all that mattered to me. In the weeks following her move, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I rented a small apartment closer to my office and started seeing a therapist to unpack the emotional wreckage I'd been carrying around. At first, I wasn't sure therapy would help. Talking about my feelings wasn't exactly my strong suit, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions I'd ever made. Betrayal like this leaves deep scars, my therapist said during one of our sessions. But it also gives you a chance to reflect, to figure out who you are outside of all of this. Who I was. The question stuck with me for days. For so long, my identity had revolved around being a husband and father. Now, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to figure it out. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. People I drifted away from because I was so focused on Emily and the kids. I started hitting the gym regularly, using exercise as an outlet for all the pent-up frustration and anger I still carried. Most importantly, I spent as much time as I could with Emma and Josh. Our visits were bittersweet. On one hand, I loved being with them, but on the other, I hated dropping them off at Emily's apartment afterward. One night, after dinner with the kids, Emma pulled me aside. "Daddy," she said hesitantly, "Mom said you don't love her anymore. Is that why you don't live with us?" The question caught me off guard. I knelt down so I could look her in the eyes. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "this isn't about love. Your mom and we just can't live together anymore. But I'll always love you and Josh. Okay? That will never change." She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I miss you at home." "I miss you too," I said, pulling her into a hug. "But I'm always here for you, no matter what." Despite my efforts to keep things civil, Emily continued to make things difficult. She frequently showed up late for custody exchanges, claiming she'd lost track of time. Other times, she tried to guilt-trip me in front of the kids, dropping comments like, "Well, if your dad hadn't left, we wouldn't have to eat out of paper plates now." I documented everything just like Linda had advised. Every late exchange, every manipulative comment. It all went into a file that I kept in case things escalated further. One evening, Emily called me out of the blue. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice shaky. I sighed. "What is it, Emily?" I need help," she admitted. "Financially. The apartment's expensive, and with the kids' school fees and everything else." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Emily, the court already ruled that I'm not obligated to provide support anymore." "I know," she said quickly. "But this isn't about me, it's about the kids. They're struggling, Matt. They're used to a certain lifestyle, and I can't give them that anymore." Her words hit a nerve, but not for the reason she thought. I loved Emma and Josh, and I hated the idea of them struggling because of her choices. "Let me think about it," I said finally. The next day, I brought it up with my therapist. "I don't want Emma and Josh to suffer because of her," I said. "But at the same time, I feel like giving her money would just be enabling her." "Those are valid feelings," my therapist said. "But you also need to consider what's sustainable for you. It's not your responsibility to clean up Emily's mess. The best thing you can do for your kids is to show up for them emotionally and be a stable presence in their lives." Her words stuck with me. The next time Emily called, I told her firmly, "I'm not giving you money, Emily. If you need help, you should have thought about that before lying to me for a decade." She didn't take it well, of course. But for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. Months passed, and slowly, the dust began to settle. The court finalized the paternity fraud case, ruling in my favor. Emily was ordered to pay back a portion of the financial support I'd provided over the years, though I doubted I'd ever see a dime of it. Meanwhile, I focused on the kids. I took them on weekend trips, helped Emma with her science projects, and coached Josh's soccer team whenever I could. I wanted them to know that no matter what happened between me and Emily, they would always have me in their corner. One day, while I was picking the kids up from Emily's apartment, she pulled me aside. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just needed to say it." I stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of sincerity. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I'm moving on, Emily. You should too. She nodded, tears in her eyes, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I grabbed the kids and left. As I drove away, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't felt before. The pain was still there. It might always be there. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally moving forward. A year had passed since everything fell apart, and life had finally started to feel normal again, or at least a new kind of normal. I had my own place, a decent routine, and regular visits with Emma and Josh. Therapy had done wonders for me, helping me let go of the anger I'd been carrying around. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it helped me put it in perspective. Emily was still a sore spot. Despite the court rulings, she'd struggled to stay afloat financially, and I knew she resented me for not stepping in to bail her out. We kept things civil for the kids, but our conversations were short and strained. I avoided her whenever I could. So, when she called me out of the blue one evening, I almost didn't answer. But something told me to pick up. "Hello," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Matt," she said softly. Her voice was different. Not angry or desperate, but quiet and almost vulnerable. "What is it, Emily?" I wanted to talk to you about something," she said hesitantly. "Not about the kids. About us." I leaned back in my chair, already bracing myself. "What about us?" "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said. "And I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Really sorry." I blinked, caught off guard. "You've said that before." "I know," she said quickly. "But I don't think I've ever really explained myself. Or owned up to what I did. I was selfish, Matt. I used you. I knew the kids weren't yours, but I didn't say anything because I was scared. And because I knew you'd take care of us. That's the truth." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Even though I'd already figured it out, hearing her admit it out loud felt like reopening an old wound. "I know I ruined everything," she continued. "And I know you'll never forgive me. But I needed to say it. I needed to tell you how sorry I am." For a long moment I didn't say anything. I stared at the floor, my mind racing. "Why now?" I asked finally. She sighed. "Because I've had a lot of time to think about what I've done. And because I see what it's done to the kids. I know I can't undo the damage, but I thought maybe if I took responsibility, it might help somehow." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her that no apology could ever make up for what she'd done. But another part of me, the part that had spent months in therapy, working through the pain, knew that wasn't the answer. "Thank you," I said finally, "for owning up to it." She sounded surprised. "You mean that?" "Yeah," I said. "I mean, it doesn't change anything. But I appreciate you saying it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "I know I've lost you. I just hope one day the kids can forgive me, too." "They're kids," I said. "They love you. They don't see you the way I do. And honestly, I hope they never have to." She let out a shaky breath. "Thank you, Matt." I didn't say anything else. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. The apology didn't erase the pain, but it gave me a strange sense of closure. For so long, I'd been waiting for her to take responsibility, to admit what she'd done. And now that she had, I felt like I could finally close that chapter of my life. A few weeks later, I was at Emma's school for a parent-teacher conference. She was doing great in school, but her teacher mentioned that she'd been quieter than usual lately. "Is everything okay at home?" the teacher asked. "It's complicated," I admitted. The teacher nodded sympathetically. "Emma's a wonderful kid. She just needs a little extra support right now." Afterward, I took Emma out for ice cream. As we sat on a bench, watching the cars go by, she looked up at me and said, "Daddy, are you happy?" Her question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know," she said, shrugging. "You just seem sad sometimes." I put my arm around her and pulled her close. "I'm okay, sweetheart. And you know what? Being with you and Josh makes me really happy." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. In that moment, I realized that no matter how much Emily had hurt me, I still had something worth fighting for. It's strange how life finds a way of settling into a rhythm, even after everything's been turned upside down. A year and a half had passed since that night I overheard Emily's conversation. The night that shattered the life I thought I had. And though the scars were still there, I felt like I was finally beginning to heal. Emma and Josh became my anchor through it all. Every laugh, every hug, every moment with them reminded me that I still had something to hold on to. They didn't need to know the full truth about what happened between me and Emily, at least not yet. For now, it was enough for them to know that I loved them and that I wasn't going anywhere. My relationship with Emily, on the other hand, remained distant. After her apology, things between us became less hostile. We communicated when we needed to, mostly about the kids, but there was no pretense of friendship. I didn't trust her, and I didn't think I ever would. Still, I could tell she was trying. She'd gotten a better job and seemed to be putting more effort into being present for the kids. I didn't know if it was genuine growth or just guilt, but either way, I was glad she was stepping up for them. One day, during one of my weekends with Emma and Josh, we decided to visit a local park we used to go to when they were younger. It was a crisp fall afternoon, the kind where the leaves crunched under your feet and the air smelled like wood smoke. "Daddy, watch this!" Josh shouted, running toward the jungle gym. I laughed as he climbed to the top, waving triumphantly. Emma, meanwhile, was busy collecting leaves, carefully inspecting each one before adding it to her growing pile. "Do you remember when we used to come here all the time?" Emma asked, looking up at me. "Of course I do," I said, crouching down next to her. "You used to insist on bringing home every rock you found." She giggled. "I still have some of them in my room." Her smile was infectious, and for a moment, I felt a deep sense of peace. This was what mattered. Not the lies, not the betrayal, just this. After we left the park, we grabbed some pizza and headed back to my apartment. As the kids curled up on the couch to watch a movie, I sat back and watched them, my heart full in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I still missed the life I thought I had. There were moments when I wondered what might have been, if things had been different. But I also knew that dwelling on the past wouldn't change it. The only thing I could do was keep moving forward. A few weeks later, I got a letter from the court. Emily's final appeal in the paternity fraud case had been denied. The ruling stood. She was responsible for paying restitution, though it was unlikely I'd ever see the money. I folded the letter and set it aside, feeling an odd sense of closure. It wasn't about the money. It was about knowing that she couldn't walk away from what she'd done without facing some kind of consequence. Not long after that, I had my first real date since the divorce. It was awkward at first. I wasn't sure if I was ready to open myself up to someone new, but it went better than I expected. She was kind, funny, and easy to talk to. As we said goodbye at the end of the night, she smiled and said, "You're a good guy, Matt. I can tell." Her words stayed with me. For so long, I doubted myself, wondering if I'd somehow failed as a husband or father. But now I realized that the problem was never me. It was the lies I'd been living under. Life didn't go back to the way it was before, but that was okay. I didn't need it to. I had my kids, my health, and the chance to start over. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. As I tucked Emma and Josh into bed one night, Josh looked up at me and said, "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, buddy," I said, kissing his forehead. No matter what, I'd always be their dad. And that was more than enough. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more dramatic and intriguing tales, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and helps bring more exciting content your way. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in this situation? See you in the next story.